FLM, wide open thinking, world-class work, and far-reaching results. Now with locations in Minneapolis, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Washington, D.C. A strategic marketing and communications company dedicated to serving clients who specialize in the business of agriculture and the life of rural communities.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And the main story coming out of Washington this week pertaining to agriculture is a vote that the House of Representatives took on a Waters of the U.S. disapproval motion that previously cleared in the Senate, needed some House action. We saw that House action this week. But Phil, this is largely just going to be a messaging vote because, I mean, it's a matter of when, not if, the White House is going to veto this bill, correct?
Right. Well, the Republicans wanted to do two things here. They wanted to show Republican voters that they are taking actions, that they're listening to their priorities and doing something about them. They also want to make the case that they can only do so much in Congress without a Republican president, especially when they don't have 60 votes in the Senate. So, you know, most bills, they can't, they can pass it in the House, but they can't get anywhere in the Senate because the Democrats won't support it over there. Well, in this case, they use something called the Congressional Review Act, and that allows Congress to vote down a rule or set of regulations that the administration proposed, set some deadlines on how quickly they have to do it. But most importantly, it doesn't require 60 votes over in the Senate to move. The Senate passed this in November. The House waited until this week and brought it up. It's part of a whole series of bills that they've been bringing up to attack various parts of the president's regulatory agenda. This resolution is called a resolution of disapproval. It passed 255 to 166, so it now goes to the president. However, the president's going to veto it, and the Republicans don't have a 2/3 majority in either the House or the Senate that it would take to overcome that veto.
And if you watched our video last week, we talked a lot about how this is really going to be kind of a strategy that the Republicans are going to be unveiling through a lot of 2016. It'll be interesting to see if there's any other agricultural provisions that are going to come under this kind of process. If they do, we'll be sure to bring you that news. But otherwise, the main other piece of news out of Washington this week regards the other chamber, the upper chamber, the Senate in the Congress, and scheduled a markup for a child nutrition piece of legislation that's been we've been waiting on that for quite some time. Always heard they were very, very close, and now we're actually seeing some action on a bill.
Right, that'll come up next week. The Senate Agriculture Committee will take up this very bipartisan bill worked out between the chairman of the committee, Pat Roberts, and the top Democrat, Debbie Stabenow. This will be a bill that will essentially make permanent the higher nutrition standards that have been implemented over the last few years by the Obama administration, coming out of the last child nutrition bill called the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act. That's expired. The administration would really like to get these higher standards written into stone, and this bill would do that. What it would also do, we haven't seen all the details yet, we won't see them until next week, but we expect there to also be some new flexibility for schools and also some additional resources in terms of training and so forth to help them, help the schools that are struggling to come into compliance.
Yeah, because if you've been following this debate for some time, there's been a lot of folks calling for flexibility, saying that these new regulations are something that's pretty hard on the schools. Yeah. And this child nutrition situation is something that had the potential to be worked into an omnibus spending bill last year. It ended up not happening. Another issue that, again, had that potential to be worked into that spending bill didn't happen is some kind of a GMO labeling preemption situation. With the Vermont law going into effect in July, there's a lot in the food industry that wants some kind of a national GMO labeling standard set up. Phil, we know that there was a meeting at USDA headquarters this week regarding GMO labeling, but we just don't know much about the contents of the meeting. But we got to understand that that's got to play some kind of a role as far as the discussion on Capitol Hill.
Oh, absolutely. Secretary Vilsack has gotten involved in this, and he told the Farm Bureau at their meeting in Orlando that he was going to communicate the results of this meeting to the Senate and the House Agriculture Committees. Everybody's been very close-lipped about it. If you want a bill passed, that's probably a good thing. When people are not talking much about what's going on. So we'll have to see. This is one of two things, along with the child nutrition reauthorization, that have a chance of getting done this year. In an election year, it's pretty difficult to pass legislation, but with the Vermont labeling law coming up, there's obviously a lot of pressure from the industry on the industry to deal with this labeling issue.
That's about going to be, it's going to be about all the news out of Washington this week. We do also want to briefly mention some action that happened in Orlando this week pertaining to the American Farm Bureau Federation annual convention. I was down there covering that earlier this week. I just want to mention that Bob Stallman retired after 16 years of service as president of AFBF. Georgia's Zippy Duval was elected as AFBF president, so he's elected to a 2-year term, along with Scott Vanderwall of South Dakota, who is elected as the organization's vice president. AFBF carries a lot of weight on Capitol Hill, agriculturally speaking, so Zippy and Scott have their work cut out for them. A lot of issues that Farm Bureau lobbies on pretty consistently on Capitol Hill. That's going to do it for this week. For Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.